if your spreadsheet is telling you that you have outsized returns on a particular deal, that ought to be a red flag.
Welcome, everyone, to the Cincinnati Real Estate Investing Show. Today, I'm your host, Ian, and I'm joined by our co-host, typically our host, Slocomb Reed. We have a special episode that we are recording for you today where we are going to cover the 17 biggest Cincy real estate investing mistakes, and we'll do it in a rapid fire style to go through a number of mistakes that we've seen investors make our time in the market. So with that being said, Slocomb, should we just go straight into it?
Yeah, I'll say that we've done plenty of research and I've been doing this for a dozen years. Our list of 17, we're trying to keep it very Cincinnati specific. Some of this, I'm sure each of these items is relevant to other markets, but this is really Cincinnati specific stuff. So don't expect the generic list that you hear on every top 17 list. This really is Cincinnati specific. And if you're trying to learn Cincinnati, you should take notice.
All right. So counting down the 17 biggest Cincinnati real estate investing mistakes. Number 17, not providing laundry in multifamily.
Yeah, typically with single family homes, it's obvious, but in multifamily, you'll find investors who don't even think about it. It's not on their list. And so you end up with 3 families, 4 families where there is no on-site laundry. And this is more of a marketing and leasing issue than it is a revenue issue, because to be honest, you're not going to make money off of coin laundry. In higher rent neighborhoods, you will see a rent bump for in-unit laundry, but having no laundry at all on site is a deal breaker for the vast majority of prospective tenants. And so if the listing doesn't say that there's laundry on site, they're not interested. If they show up and they find no laundry on site, you're just not going to get the applications and you're not going to get the quality of tenants that you would expect if you just put coin laundry machines in the basement. I know it's an upfront expense or it's a long-term service contract. It's not about the ROI, the way that it hits your profit and loss. It's about being able to get high quality tenants, because the high quality tenants will all, regardless of neighborhood, they'll all want to be able to do their laundry at home somewhere.
All right. Coming in at number 16, not checking the parking.
This is also primarily for multifamily, although there are a lot of single family neighborhoods where the assumption is that there's a driveway to park in. I live in Northside. There's a massive delta in the single family homes listed on the market right now between the ones that have off-street parking and the ones that don't. The ones that don't sit for 4 months longer. And when you're looking at 4-bedroom homes, multiple bathroom homes in Northside, the delta, the off-street parking is worth about $50,000 in property value and purchase price. On the multifamily side, you see the same thing. And there are a lot of neighborhoods where people are going to assume that they have plenty of parking off street. It's really ubiquitous. Everyone wants to park off street. And the major rules of thumb here are that you want a minimum of 1 parking spot per unit. The ideal number is closer to 1 per bedroom or a little higher than 1 per bedroom, because you don't want a massive parking lot that you have to maintain that's not getting filled. But if you have 1 parking spot per bedroom, all your tenants will be happy. There are some places where you can get away with no on-street parking. You're going to need a really desirable location for other reasons, though. So you really need to pay close attention to the parking situation when you're considering the deal before you even write an offer.
And this is specific to Cincinnati, because in other markets, maybe you think that this is especially important in Cincinnati compared to some places where maybe there's more public transit or, yeah.
If you live in a place where you can be 20 years old and you don't have your driver's license yet, you simply don't understand the way that the Midwest lives. That's just the way that it is. We all drive. We all got that sense of freedom getting our license when we were a teenager, with very few exceptions. The ability to drive for a lot of renters is also the ability to work, not because they drive for work, but because they drive to get there. And frankly, our public transit is not good enough to be relied upon to get you to and from work. And so everybody drives on site or nearby is a major frustration. And really, it becomes a leasing issue. It's not necessarily monetizable in most cases, but it will affect whether or not quality prospects want to live in your rental.
Makes sense. Good insight. So, number 15 is something that was applicable to a deal that I just looked at. But number 15, not checking for flood zones.
Yeah, it's applicable to a single family home that I bought last year where the flood zone is like pretend Finger Lakes. I say pretend because there's no water there now, but there's a flood zone that like Finger Lakes right through the parcel of this house that I bought at the beginning of 2025. And so I had to pay for flood insurance. I was buying it off market. I got a good enough deal that I went ahead with the purchase without changing terms or anything like that. This is low on the list because your insurance agent or your insurance provider is very likely to look into this for you if you don't do it yourself. You don't likely get to closing without knowing that you're in a flood zone. But it is something that comes up in a lot of neighborhoods of Cincinnati, that there are flood zones because of creeks, small rivers, other moving bodies of water that you just aren't thinking about because they don't even feel like they're close to you. But there was a flood 150 years ago, and so now they have to have a flood zone for it. It is a thing that you need to be mindful of. You should be checking yourself. Your insurance provider should be checking for you, though, if you don't do it yourself.
Hey, number 14, missing the foundation cracks.
So speaking especially in residential and multifamily, there are three types of foundations. You've got stone, concrete block, and poured concrete. Between the two concrete styles, it's going to get cracks eventually that just result from thermal expansion. The ground outside of the foundation changing in temperature through the course of the year, and the inside hopefully not. And so you're going to get some cracks there. The issues, speak to a home inspector or a structural engineer, but the issues are going to be when pressure, usually from rainwater, is building against the foundation wall and causing it to push in on itself. Concrete foundations are stronger than block foundations. They withstand that pressure much better. And there are some more affordable ways to better support them or seal them when this issue comes up. Block foundations tend to be the ones that fail under that pressure from rainwater and other water building against the foundation. You can also work on regrading the area around the property, just meaning that the earth slopes away from it instead of towards it, so that rainwater flows away from the building. My favorite is stone foundations because water passes through stone. You don't get the same kind of pressure buildup on a stone foundation because the water that's applying pressure to those concrete walls simply passes through the stone into your basement. That does mean that you end up with a wet basement, but it also means you end up with a very durable foundation. When you buy a property in Cincinnati that is over 100 years old, chances are it has a stone foundation. You got to think to yourself, that stone foundation's already been there for 100 years. It's very likely to last 100 more because it lets the basement get wet. It lets the water through. And then you deal with that water in other ways. And you make sure that if you have a stone foundation, that you are very mindful of that when you're thinking about doing things like finishing a basement.
Time for the Queen City Pulse, a quick look at what's making news in Cincinnati real estate. 3CDC is putting $4 million into the Mercer Common Apartments in Over the Rhine, according to the Business Courier. The plan splits the 4,000 square foot ground floor commercial space on Walnut Street after 2 arcade bars failed there, including 16-bit. Half becomes tenant amenities and a leasing office. The other 2,000 square feet gets marketed to a neighborhood bar. The building's 67 units are being upgraded as they turned over, and a converted fitness center adds 4 more units to bring that total to 71. 3CDC owned the commercial space for years, but only recently bought the units above it, and now it's betting on residential over retail. The Ohio Housing Finance Agency awarded Cincinnati developers more than $65 million in 9% low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, this round. That funds 188 affordable units across Over the Rhine, Pendleton, and Walnut Hills. Dunes Place brings 58 scatter site units in OTR. National Church Residences is building 60 senior units at 550 Reading Road in Pendleton, across from the Hard Rock Casino. A 7-unit project lands on May Street in Walnut Hills. The Ohio Housing Financing Agency's new regional system gives Southwest Ohio its own pot of money instead of competing head-to-head with Columbus, which used to win several of the awards. I grew up watching Chinadum and Dukeway, a safety for the Cincinnati Bengals, and now he's the founder of Cincinnati-based Kingsley & Co., and has done a number of deals in Cincinnati. Chinadum is also planning a $23 million, 65-unit affordable project in Columbus called Mercy on Main, his first tax credit deal there. Locally, he expects to start Kinsley Lofts in Walnut Hills soon, and forecasts a Coreyville student housing groundbreaking in the second quarter of 2027. That's the Queen City Pulse. Back to the show. Okay. Yeah. On to number 13, missing the galvanized steel plumbing.
So galvanized steel was used during the Vietnam War era because it was cheaper than copper, and copper was going into the war effort and skyrocketed in price. The biggest issue with galvanized steel is that it corrodes from the inside, meaning that you don't get to see from the outside of the pipe when it's starting to have issues. Typically, you're going to want to get galvanized steel plumbing replaced whenever you come across it. That often involves hiring a plumber. It's an expense that you need to take very seriously.
Number 12, missing the aluminum wiring.
Yeah, so aluminum wiring, I will say as an investor, does not necessarily need to be replaced. It's another example of the US economy looking for more affordable metals when copper got really expensive during the Vietnam War. Aluminum wiring requires special fixtures or connectors because it has more thermal expansion than copper does. And that tends to be the issue, is where the aluminum wiring is connecting to things that are not rated for it. That's something you need to be very careful about. Hopefully you're getting an inspection in the first place and you notice it. It also could have an impact on your property insurance, your ability to get it from some carriers. It may get excluded by other carriers or significantly increase the cost of your insurance if you don't get it addressed properly, ideally by a licensed electrician.
Yeah. Number 11, another electrical one, missing the knob and tube.
Yeah, so knob and tube wiring is made of copper. It's very old. But I will say that a lot of the issues with knob and tube wiring tend to come from the age. It's simply been in place for a long time. I've had issues where we were planning to leave the knob and tube wiring in place. The insurance provider was fine with it, but when we went to swap out outlets during a unit turn, it was so old and deteriorated that it just crumbled up and fell into the wall cavity. And we weren't able to find it anymore. And we ended up having to replace that knob and tube just because it wasn't working anymore. Is there a fire risk? Ask your insurance guy and your inspector, but you want to be aware when you have knob and tube in your building.
Yeah. So in these buildings, where will you see them? You'll see them in the basement, in the attic. They'll be behind the walls. You'll want to know if it's active or not. What is your advice for somebody doing an inspection, what to look for?
I would encourage our listeners to come to their own opinion about whether or not knob and tube is acceptable. I will say that you need to make sure that you're getting appropriate property insurance, regardless of whether or not you have knob and tube. You will also find in a lot of, especially single family homes, where remodelers, whether they were owner occupants or investors, they were trying to keep their remodel affordable. So when they upgraded their kitchen or they upgraded their HVAC, like adding central air to a forced air furnace, they only replaced the wiring for those circuits, and they left the knob and tube for things like light fixtures, bedroom outlets, ceiling fans, because those circuits don't tend to get the same, cover the same electrical load as an air conditioner when it's really hot outside, or an oven, or an electric oven, or a refrigerator. So you will find that there have been some partial replacements in the past, and that the high demand or high amperage circuits have already been replaced, and the knob and tube is still there on the lower amperage circuits.
Okay, number 10, not getting a sewer scope.
So we've run through a lot of like physical condition, mechanical condition issues in this list already. This is the biggest one because there are some very findable issues that you can have in your drain plumbing or your sewer plumbing that simply getting a camera in there and looking for them is going to reveal. Getting a sewer scope is not always perfect, but you're talking about cast iron drain lines that can be quite old. And then typically, especially in older Cincinnati, like World War II, pre-World War II, even after World War II, you're going to have clay sewer laterals as soon as you get out from underneath the house. So clay, obviously, not the sturdiest of materials. It's very common. There are a couple of things here. The one that people assume if they're thinking about a sewer scope is that the sewer line could be collapsed under the house or out in the yard. It could have root intrusion where tree roots are growing into it or separating it. And that's something that you should find when you have a sewer scope. The other thing, especially with multifamily, is that even in the drain stacks, so the vertical pipe that receives the drain from each of the fixtures, you could have a lot of buildup. That's getting stuck because the 3-4 inch pipes have a lot of buildup of things like cooking oil over time and other things that build up on the inside of the pipe. And so getting a sewer scope, including the drain stack, helps you figure out how much buildup there is there and whether or not you'd be able to prevent a lot of future blockages by doing something like water jetting the sewer lines.
Yeah, and we have both walked away or negotiated a credit regarding things with sewer lines. On the deal that we partnered on before, we were able to install sewer liner to address and remediate the issue. Sometimes it's more serious.
And a lot of homeowners, owner occupant investment or otherwise, they have an impending sewer line issue that they're not aware of because the water always drains. Sometimes it's always draining into a cavity being formed by the breakage in the sewer line and all of the wastewater that drains down into the cavity. Ian and I have a story there we'll save for another day. But people tend to assume that just because they can always flush the toilet when they try, there's no problem, and that's not necessarily the case. So even if the seller is telling you there are no sewer problems, you should still get a sewer scope.
Yeah. Is there a certain age where it's if the property is before a certain year, you're getting a sewer scope?
At my company, TLP, we have maintenance technicians with sewer scopes in their vehicle, and they're all trained on how to use them. So I'm always getting a sewer scope. I would say that it's always important with multifamily sewer lines simply get used more often because more people live in those buildings. I would recommend that you always get a sewer scope, frankly, because even if you're going to assume that the sewer lines are PVC all the way to the sewer main that is owned by the city or the municipality where you are, a lot of times those PVC lines could have been set wrong in the first place, or they could have separated over time. So I always want to know. I always want the sewer scope.
Nope, you always got to add that sewer scope in there. All right, number 9, assuming you are or aren't in Cincinnati.
So the city of Cincinnati boundaries have a couple of neighborhoods within them that are actually independent cities. So you've got Norwood, St. Bernard, Elmwood Place. And it's not always obvious when you are crossing, not just with those neighborhoods, but on the outer perimeter of the city of Cincinnati. It's not always obvious when you're crossing into a part of town that is not Cincinnati anymore. This matters in a lot of ways. We'll talk about school district higher up on this list. It also matters with regards to utilities. In the city of Cincinnati, 1 to 4 unit properties have trash and recycling collection included in the property taxes. In the vast majority of the rest of the metro area, you're paying for that separately. That's an important factor to consider, is whether or not you are actually in the city of Cincinnati, so that you know what that means for school districts, but you also know what that means for the cost of your utilities.
Yeah, and the utilities can differ.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My company, Three Little Pigs, and I, we're expert operators at real estate investing in Greater Cincinnati, and we created this podcast to add value to you and to anyone who wants to listen to content like this. You can also find us all over social media if that's your preference. If you're looking to engage an expert operator for your investments in the Greater Cincinnati area, please reach out to us. Our platform includes property management by me through Keller Williams Seven Hills Realty. We're also general contractors. We have in-house maintenance and in-house HVAC, and we share the entire platform with the private equity opportunities that we create. We also take on third-party clients to operate their investments as well. The property management, the general contracting, in-house maintenance and HVAC, and we can also do a lot of the residential sales. So if you're an active or passive investor looking to partner with an expert Cincinnati operator, please reach out to us. You can find our contact info in the bio.
Number 8, assuming that neighborhoods and zip codes are homogenous.
This is a big one in a lot of places. I talk about Westwood all the time, how there are parts of Westwood I want to live in, and there are parts of Westwood I would never manage in, third party or otherwise. There are a lot of parts of Cincinnati that are street by street and even block by block. And there are neighborhoods, I'm not going to name any in this segment, but there are neighborhoods where you have very different crime rates based on which part of the neighborhood that you're in. And so you really need to understand the micro location when you're considering an investment. Just knowing that it's in 45211 or 45238 or 45242, 45243, it's not enough to just know what zip code you're in or what the neighborhood is called on the county auditor site.
And with that, number 7, not checking for school districts.
Yeah, there are several places within the city of Cincinnati that school district, when it comes to property values and demand for rent and rent rates, it matters more than what municipality that you're in. For example, I think that it's either 3 or 4 different school districts that Green Township splits up into. And your property value, the demand for your property, the rent rates are going to be impacted significantly by which school district your Green Township properties are in. Another one is Mount Healthy schools. There are several townships around Mount Healthy that don't have their own school districts. So they go, some parts of those neighborhoods go into Northwest, some go into Mount Healthy, and it's important to know which one you're buying in. Another example is that Indian Hill schools have a few bordering neighborhoods that are not the village of Indian Hill that are zoned or that pertain to Indian Hill schools. There are parts of Sycamore Township and Kenwood. There are some other neighborhoods where it's actually Indian Hill schools, even though you're not in Indian Hill. So you really want to understand that, because school district does play a major factor in a property's value, the rent it's going to command.
Okay, number 6, letting your spreadsheets determine what you buy.
So there are a lot of people, especially non-local investors, who are coming here for cash flow, who are underwriting a lot of deals and get most attracted to the deals that they underwrite to have the highest cash flow. So number 1, make sure you check your spreadsheet and check your formulas because you may have an issue there. And number two, if you're seeing outsized cash on cash returns in your spreadsheet on particular locations, chances are it's because that location is really difficult to operate and your operating expenses are going to be significantly higher. Your vacancy loss will be higher because it's harder to get tenants in a location like that. And your maintenance costs, your unit turn costs are going to be higher as well because you're likely looking at less qualified tenants who are going to be tougher on your building. An example here would be a street that we no longer manage on. We terminated our agreements with our landlords but this particular block on this particular street had 10 shots fired calls with the local police department in the last 4 years, and half of those had resulted in fatalities. And we simply didn't want that kind of I didn't want to be sending the people who work for me into that area and they didn't feel comfortable being there. So we didn't want to manage it. And you probably don't want to invest in it either because of what that kind of stigma can do to a property's value and what it can do to the rental demand to live there. So if your spreadsheet is telling you that you have outsized returns on a particular deal, that ought to be a red flag. Should you look into it? Absolutely. You also need to understand why it is that kind of location, especially for an on-market deal, can have such perceptively higher returns without it already having been pounced on by someone who's local and sophisticated.
Number 5, property tax reassessments.
Yeah, so this has become fairly national news very recently. It's something that we've been very aware of for a while here. So you've seen a lot of headlines about how property tax reassessments in the last few years are affecting homeowners and how property taxes, we have broad reassessments across every parcel in the greater Cincinnati area, at least in the Ohio portion, every 3 years. Another thing I would advise that you to look out for is that when the property was purchased very cheap by the person you are buying it from, they have an incredibly low property tax basis that will likely be increased to your purchase price when you buy. So the first thing here is, just to give you an example, if a house flipper bought the house for $50,000, they renovated it, they sold it to you for $200,000 because you know you can cash flow when you put a tenant in there. Their tax basis is 1/4 of what yours will be, meaning that if the current taxes are based on their $50,000 number, they're going to quadruple when the county auditor reassesses the property to $200,000. And that's a significant expense that you need to be ready for, and you need to be underwriting to the property taxes at your purchase price, not just what they currently are.
And one tip is on the county assessor's website, there's actually on the drop down menu one section where you can type in the new purchase price and see what that property tax would be recalculated as. Another resource for understanding how property taxes are calculated are on Slocomb. You mentioned that property taxes are reassessed every 3 years. There's a big one every 6 years. The process is a little bit different between every other property tax reassessment. And in 2023, it was more of a headline because the reassessments came in so high because they were coming right out of COVID, probably historically compared to other reassessments. Any insights on maybe what the difference is? 2023 was a big one. They send out people to look at the properties. What is the difference in the process in 2026? And do you think that, we really have no idea, but is it going to be another giant leap in property tax assessments compared to 2023, or what would your take be?
I'd say it's still more important to understand the circumstance surrounding each property, because the properties that have transacted in the meantime since the last reassessment are going to see the biggest changes. Appreciated since 2023, 24. It's appreciating now, actually, for the vast majority of single family and for a lot of multifamily as well. So there is a possibility that taxes get reassessed higher. We're not expecting it to be quite like the reassessment that included the COVID and post-COVID boom in appreciation. I would say you really need to be looking into the micros and how it impacts your property specifically.
Yeah, and one other insight, because different markets will have had different experiences since 2023. Between March 2025 to March 2026, Cincinnati is number 5 in home sales price growth with an increase of 6.7% year over year. So a little bit of a different narrative than in the rest of the nation. Okay, on to number 4, choosing the cheapest service providers.
Yeah, we're getting into the really big ones here. This is an issue everywhere. It's a big issue here in Cincinnati because you can get really cheap labor here in ways that you can't in other places. Contract labor is not as regulated. There is no such thing as a licensed general contractor in greater Cincinnati. And so the bar for calling yourself a general contractor is significantly lower than it is in California, for example. Just saying you're a general contractor means less here. And so you really do, for the most part, get what you pay for with service providers, whether that's people in the trades or your real estate agent, your property manager. There's a big difference in the quality of service that you can receive from a property manager that charges 6% as opposed to one that charges 10%, all other things being equal in their business models. The one who charges 10% has more revenue that they can use to provide better services to you. I'm not guaranteeing that more expensive PMs are better. The one who's at 6%, though, is likely not able to deliver the same quality of service. So you may see that difference of 4%, and on your spreadsheet, it looks really compelling. That doesn't necessarily mean that the 6% property manager is going to do a better job of driving NOI for your property because they may not have sufficient staff. They may not be able to provide the same level of service as someone who is offering a more market standard fee. This goes, however, for plumbers, tradespeople as well. You can find really cheap people to do that work in Cincinnati, even painters who are really cheap. And the cheap options rarely ever work out all that well. Another thing here is not actually a part of number 4, the mistake of choosing the cheapest service providers, but you will also find that there are licensed tradespeople who charge more than double what you really should be paying for their service because they know that they can get away with it and because they have massive marketing budgets that they have to cover. So you should be finding reasonably priced service providers. The cheapest ones rarely ever work out in your favor.
Number 3, waiting too long to engage a PM.
I'm going to answer this one with an example. Someone reached out to me. They were referred to me. I don't remember who by, but it wasn't their real estate agent. In a few days, they were going to close on a 4-family on a street that starts with Glen, which doesn't help you all that much because there are 3 or 4 neighborhoods that have streets that start with Glen. It's not the one that you're thinking of, and that's part of the issue. So the agent had gotten them through the inspection, ready to close. The lender, the appraisal, everything was done. They reached out to me and they wanted to know if I was interested, if I would manage the property for them, how much I charge. And I said, no, I'm sorry, we're not interested. We don't believe in that location. It's going to be high vacancy, high maintenance cost, lower qualified tenants. There's nowhere to park. All up and down the street, you're seeing cars parked up on the sidewalks because none of them have anywhere to go. It's just not a desirable place to live. And I sent him the photos that showed all of this. I never entered the property, but I sent him the photos that showed him what I was seeing about the location. And no one else in the transaction had bothered to have that conversation with him. As the property manager, I was the person he reached out to who was going to be holding his hand, working in alignment with him for at least a year. My role did not end when the property transacted, and that's not when I was getting paid either. And so I was the first person to tell him I wasn't interested because I wasn't going to get paid and up front. I was only going to get paid over time, and it was a time I didn't want to spend managing that property. To that buyer's credit, he ended up, your property manager is signing up to be by your side for the long haul, operating your investments. They get paid over time, and they are the ones who will deal with all of the issues that you're buying when you buy. You should not be waiting until 2-3 days before you close on a property to find your property manager. You should have identified this person a long time ago. You really should be looking to engage with property managers early in the process so that they can be one of the people advising you on the prospect of investing in particular properties. So you at least get an idea. I had a phone call this morning with a woman from, it was a New Jersey area code, and she said she was coming in town to look at 2 properties from 2 commercial brokers. And I told her that we wouldn't be interested in managing either of them based on the location and the other factors that were obvious to me just going to Google Maps. Fortunately for her, she's getting to have this conversation with the person who would be by her side through her investment early enough that she hasn't spent the money. She hasn't even come to Cincinnati yet, and she has a much better perspective on what's going on here because she's talking to the person who doesn't make a big lump sum payment commission up front for securing a loan or for getting a transaction closed. She's getting her advice from the person who would be by her side the whole way early enough to know what she shouldn't be looking at.
Yeah, definitely agree. Make that call earlier than 4 days before close.
For sure.
Mistake number 2, over improving for the location.
This is a big one. There are a lot of people who assume that new cabinets, fancy countertops, a backsplash, new floors are going to have a solid ROI in any apartment, and that's simply not the case. We have a lot of C-class multifamily in Cincinnati, and when I say C-class in this circumstance, the mostly 1960s brick bunker construction. There's a basic 4-family layout and there's a basic 12-family layout that are sometimes actually 11 units, but it's the same layout. Those apartments can only be improved so much affordably. And when you're going to get into things like decommissioning the boiler system to replace it with electric heat, whether that's electric baseboard or you're going with like mini splits, and you're talking about upgrading the electrical system for the building so that you can go to mini splits, and you're trying to do these kinds of things to increase rent, you really need to check that the location can bear that the amount of a rent increase that you will need to have a positive ROI on those improvements. So we often see people come in and think that just because they take this 1960s 12 unit and they get rid of the boiler, upgrade the electrical, go with mini splits for pseudo central heating and air, granite counters on brand new soft close shaker cabinets, new LVP throughout, that they're going to be able to take a 1-bedroom from $800 a month to $1,200 a month, and they make it to $850. And there's just no way that's a viable business plan in a lot of locations. So you really need to focus on how you can provide a quality place to live in the budget allowed to you by the rent that the location will pay. If you go on Zillow and you don't see any rents where you think your rents should be for comparable apartments or homes in a location close to there that's similar, then you really need to focus on figuring out what rent increases are realistic and whether or not you can improve your properties to get to that rent in a manner that's going to have a good return on your remodeling investment.
All right. And the number one biggest Cincy REI mistake, disrespecting your tenants.
This is huge and easily the biggest mistake that we see investors make, whether they are here or they are remote on the East or West Coast or international. Disrespected tenants leave, and in the meantime, they don't respect their home. And that causes a significant amount of loss for landlords, damage, vacancy loss. It's very clear when you walk through multifamily and stained common area hallways, light fixtures that are hanging off the ceiling and not working. There are also making sure that your tenants are being communicated in a way that is respectful, that whoever is operating your rentals, whether it's you or your property manager, that they have systems for making sure that tenants receive dignity and respect and feel dignified and respected by the way that you operate, that you handle their home. Vitally important. It leads not only because all people deserve dignity and respect, also because it is the most profitable way to operate in this space. People who feel respected and dignified are happier to keep paying good rent on time longer in that home where the landlord and the manager treat them with dignity and respect. Respectful communication, timeliness in responding to inquiries and resolving issues, and making sure that the property is well kept. These are all very basic things. They should be very basic things for anyone, but treating your tenants with dignity and respect is easily the most profitable way to operate in this space in Cincinnati.
Yeah, we're still providing a housing service to tenants, providing homes to our community. So really important to take that seriously, take the responsibility of that seriously. Story outside of Cincinnati, but a property that we bought in California prior to close, it was self-managed. The owner's mom cursed out one of the tenants who probably didn't deserve that, and he broke all the windows in the unit and left.
Yeah, that's
Terrible.
not going to be covered by the security deposit.
Yeah. Extreme example, but can't believe that some of that stuff happens. With that being said, anything else you missed or anything else you want to say, Slocomb?
There are a few themes running through this list that just closed. I would say that the main themes here are that you need to have an understanding of the amenities that Cincinnatians care about. A lot of people don't consider laundry and parking to be amenities, but those are two boxes that every prospective tenant is trying to check when they're looking at properties. You've got issues here understanding older mechanicals that may not exist where you live. I was just at a property management conference where the vast majority of property managers only manage things that are 30 years old or younger. Those neighborhoods didn't exist before 1978, and so they've never had to worry about this stuff. If you live in one of those places, you come to Cincinnati and you need to worry about this stuff. Knob and tube, aluminum wiring, galvanized steel, foundations that are more than a few years old. The other themes here are understanding your location, whether or not it is the city of Cincinnati, the micro factors affecting your address, not just the zip code or the name of the neighborhood, understanding your school district. We have mistakes around not understanding how not understanding whether or not your cash flow is being calculated accurately, because more difficult to operate areas are going to have higher operating expenses and higher vacancy loss. And then you have making sure that you are engaging good quality service providers and engaging them with enough advance notice that gives them the opportunity to do their job and advise you on what you need to be advised on. And then the big one here is simply treating people well, especially the people who determine the financial viability of your investments, and especially the tenants. Just want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to listen. Appreciate you all. If you did gain value from this episode, please share it with someone who also needs to hear this list of the 17 biggest Cincy REI mistakes. Leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to the show so you get the rest of our content, and we will see you next week. Quick disclaimer, the opinions expressed on this podcast are provided for informational purposes only. This is not an offer to buy or sell any securities, to make or consider any investment or course of action, and it is not an offer of agency from Slocomb Reed or Keller Williams, Seven Hills Realty.